Here's the second half now of my thoughts on why people love America. In the first half, we were talking about how the Constitution was written, why it was written, how America was languishing, spinning its wheels after we had won our freedom in the Revolutionary War. And finally it was decided that a new form of government was necessary. And we had talked about how it was a three-branched form of government. And when it came time for them to devise the executive branch, they knew they had to do their best work, for it would be the executive that would forge America's foreign policy, and the President of the United States would be the visual representative of this country abroad. The more they debated, the more they talked about what the texture, the persona, the charisma of the American presidency should be, the more their eyes strayed to the front of the room, to the President of the Constitutional Convention, a man who had kept them on track and in focus through all of the debate. A tall, quiet man with rotten teeth and failing eyesight. A man who had shocked the world when, after the treaty was signed in Paris, he surrendered his sword to the legislature, saying that he thought the American military should be run by civilians. Yes, in many ways the presidency of this country was shaped in the image and likeness of George Washington. And so the next time you hear him called the father of our country, you will understand even more. So the delegates asked themselves, how have we done? Each rose and gave his assessment of the new Constitution, and the last to rise was Benjamin Franklin. He had slept through much of the debate. Is it perfect? No, it's not. Could we have done better? Yes. Could we have done worse? Yes. And to demonstrate that the new Constitution was not perfect, he reminded them that even the sun has spots. Then when it came time to sign, the conceivers of the Declaration and then the Constitution, in the Constitution, did something that we might not have done. For if we had written it, we probably would have written, "We the undersigned." But they had taken care of that on day one, page one, line one, because they wrote, "We the people of the United States," in order to form a more perfect union. And when they signed not only for themselves, but for the nearly 4 million Americans alive at that time, but they also made it abundantly clear that they were signing for their posterity. And if you look around the room you're in, or look in the mirror, you will see what that posterity looks like. Because before we were born, before our parents or our grandparents were born, our names, their names were on that document. And the names of every man and woman yet to be born in America's limitless future are there. For the Constitution is a sacred contract that was signed in the past for us, that is valid at this moment, that is taking us into tomorrow. So they made handwritten copies, and they sent it out, and they held their breath. And people really liked it. Common, ordinary, decent, hard-working men and women were told for the first time that they had dignity, and not that that dignity had been given them by those men in Philadelphia. Those men in Philadelphia simply informed them in writing that they had had it all along. But the more they read it, the more they began to ask questions. You see, they had been given this great big limitless bucket of freedom, and too much freedom can be too much power. And so they wondered, if there's another war, can the military force me to house the army, as they did this time? If 20 years from now I don't like the president, can I stand on a street corner and tell the world why without fear of being arrested? If I am arrested, will I immediately know why? Will I have a lawyer? Will I be tried by a jury? Who will be on that jury? Will I have to testify against myself? And maybe most importantly of all, will any government official ever try to tell me how to pray. Now, the great unsung hero of the Revolution, George Mason, may have put it best. He said, the Constitution is amendable. Let's fix it. Let's define America's freedoms. But you cannot amend the Constitution until it's ratified. So one by one, the states said yes, and many put a little post-it note with their vote asking for changes. One state wanted 4 amendments, one wanted nearly 30. So one by one, the states ratified. The Constitution became the new marching orders for the country. Now, it's hard to believe that when you realize how enormous the federal government is, that on day one, all 3 branches met in one little building in New York City, Federal Hall. But you know, when you're starting a new government, you've got an awful lot on your mind. And changing your Constitution is something you don't want to think about yet. So that idea was put on the back burner for 3 years. Finally, a delegate rose on the floor of the House of Representatives and heeded the call of George Mason, who had said, when the Constitution gets changed, don't do it behind closed doors, the way it was done in Philadelphia, but do it out in the open. So there on the floor of the House, 10 amendments were crafted. And if you're not sure the spirit of Philadelphia was with those men in New York, read the 10th. Any power not used by the federal government or earmarked for use by the states is the property of the people. So they made copies and they sent it out, and people really liked it. And one by one, the states said, yes, let's go with this. The last state to make it official was ironically the state of George Mason, of George Washington, of Thomas Jefferson. And so late on the afternoon of December the 15th, 1791, with the signature of Virginia, the Bill of Rights became law, and America's freedoms, as we know them, were finalized. Now, I like to think that something special was with those men in Philadelphia and New York. You can call it the hand of God, divine providence, fate, whatever. For what they crafted was so new, so different, so revolutionary. And it has been so copied and so lasting over the years. Now, if you don't think that we have something pretty special in our form of government, you need to think about some of the coincidences surrounding the Founding Fathers. Some of these you may have heard. 50th anniversary of the announcement of the Declaration of Independence, John Adams lay dying. All he talked about apparently was what was going to happen to America. And as he drew his last breath, he said, at least Thomas Jefferson survives. But what he had no way of knowing in the days before the telephone and CNN and instant communications was that just a couple of hours earlier, Thomas Jefferson had died. Both of them died. 50th anniversary, almost to the moment of when the Declaration of Independence was being announced. 55th anniversary, our 5th president, James Monroe, died. And as the 60th anniversary was approaching, little James Madison took ill. Now, I don't mean to be derisive by calling him little James Madison. At 5'3", he was the smallest man to ever be president. But James Madison was a giant. He advocated a complete separation between church and state, said every American child was entitled to a good education, and that eventually slavery should be abolished. And in his last public speech, James Madison said that freedom to survive had to be nourished and tended. No, Madison didn't want to die. His family did not want him to die. But more than that, he wanted to live until the 4th of July, but it didn't happen. June 28th, 1836, James Madison died. A courier rushed the word to the White House, and the man in the Oval Office took the news as if he had been hit by a ton of bricks. Old Hickory, Andy Jackson, went to his room and wept. For up until that point, if he had had any question about the Constitution, he could have called in Madison, who was beginning to be called the father of the Constitution, and said, "Mr. Madison, what is the extent of free speech? What is the right to bear arms? What was this thing that you and those other boys wrote so many years ago? The Constitution that you gave birth to." But with the death of James Madison, the last founding father had died. The last link to the past was gone. And Jackson must have thought that up until that moment, the ship of state had always sailed within sight of land. But now he and every other American president had to take it into uncharted waters. But not really. Andy Jackson had a chart. We have that chart. And if we would be permitted by the men and women of the National Archives to reach behind those inches of protective glass and retrieve the Constitution, we could hold in our hands America's freedoms and her future, not because of the might of an army, not because of the personality of a potentate, not because of the whim of a dictator, but because of simple English words, lovingly crafted in now fading ink on now crumbling parchment. And that is what people don't understand about us. You know, those terrorists did some terrible things that day, but at least they didn't take down the Statue of Liberty, and as long as that gentle woman is in the harbor holding that torch, the welcome mat is out. The vacancy lamp is lit. Now, a lot of people think that immigration is the great evil. Unbridled, illegal immigration is a very serious matter. But some people forget that it was the influx of men and women from every part of the world that brought about the complex interwoven patchwork quilt that is America and is her strength. No, America is not like an elevator that once you get in, you want the doors to close. You know, many people who don't understand that would have been aghast if they had been in the room when the Declaration of Independence was signed, because some of those men were aliens. They had come to this country and tasted freedom and liked it. And they were willing to pledge their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors to stay here. You know, a lot of people don't really understand what's written on the Statue of Liberty. If you ask them, they'll say, "Give me you're tired, you're poor." That's just part of the third verse. You see, the French gave us that statue, and a statue that enormous needs an enormous pedestal on which to stand. We paid for the pedestal. Many American children sent in pennies, nickels, dimes. And a little woman named Emma Lazarus, seeing the finished statue, sent in a poem. She contrasted the statue to another colossus in another harbor at another time with another torch, holding it for another reason. The Colossus of Rhodes, standing there with legs spanning the harbor, with a torch to warn people to stay away. Emma Lazarus called her poem The New Colossus. The words are electric, carefully chosen. Listen to the words, and when I get to the ending, I think you'll understand more. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land, here at our sea-washed sunset gate shall stand a mighty woman with a torch whose flame is the imprisoned lightning. Her name, Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp, she cries with silent lips. Give me. You're tired. You're poor. your huddled masses yearning to breathe free the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Maybe it's not so much that other people in other countries don't understand us. Maybe it's just that they're jealous. God bless us. God bless America. I'm Dennis Daly. Thanks.